Picture this: 1945. A decorated black Marine walks into a segregated bus station in Louisiana, still wearing his uniform. When he refuses to move to the colored section, the police beat him so badly he's left partially blind. But instead of staying silent, he does something that shakes the entire nation and forces a president to act. His name was Isaac Woodard, and this is the story they erased from your history books. The year is 1946, and America is celebrating. World War II has just ended, and the boys are coming home. Parades fill the streets. Flags wave from every window. The nation that defeated fascism is ready to embrace its heroes. But there's a problem with that story. Because when over 1 million black Americans who served overseas came marching home, they didn't return to parades. They returned to a country that refused to see them as heroes at all. These men had stormed beaches in Normandy. They'd flown fighter planes over enemy territory. They'd bled and died in foxholes alongside white soldiers, fighting to defeat tyranny and hatred abroad. But the moment they stepped off those ships and trains back onto American soil, they were reminded of a harsh truth. The uniform didn't matter. The medals didn't matter. All that mattered was the color of their skin. Jim Crow laws ruled the South with absolute authority. Segregation wasn't just tradition or custom. It was the law of the land. Black veterans couldn't vote in the states they'd fought to protect. They couldn't eat at the same lunch counters as the white men they'd served beside. They couldn't drink from the same water fountains or use the same bathrooms. And perhaps most dangerously, they couldn't speak up about it. Because Southern authorities saw these returning black soldiers as a threat. These men had tasted equality in Europe and the Pacific. They'd been treated as human beings, as soldiers, as men. And now they were coming home with expectations. Expectations of dignity. Expectations of respect. Expectations that white supremacy could not afford to tolerate. The response was swift and brutal. Lynchings increased across the South. Terror campaigns intensified. Black veterans were specifically targeted, beaten, and murdered for wearing their uniforms in public. The message was crystal clear. You may have been a soldier over there, but over here, you're still just another black man who needs to know his place. Isaac Woodard was one of those veterans, born in 1919 in rural North Carolina. He joined the Army and served honorably in the Pacific Theater for 15 months. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't political. He was just a man trying to do his duty and get home to his wife. On February 12, 1946, just hours after receiving his honorable discharge at Camp Gordon in Georgia, Woodard boarded a Greyhound bus. He was heading home to North Carolina, still wearing his uniform, still wearing his discharge pin with pride. He had no idea that he would never see his wife's face again. The trouble started simply enough. The bus made a stop, and Woodard asked the driver, a white man named Alton Blackwell, if he had time to use the restroom. Blackwell didn't like his tone. Maybe Woodard didn't say, "Sir." Maybe he didn't sound subservient enough. Whatever the reason, Blackwell took offense. Words were exchanged. Nothing physical, nothing violent. Just a black veteran asking to use a bathroom and a white bus driver who didn't like being questioned. When the bus reached Batesburg, South Carolina, Blackwell had made a decision. He called ahead to the local police. What happened next wasn't an arrest. It wasn't even an attempt at justice. It was a lynching that stopped just short of murder. The town's police chief, a man named Linwood Shull, met the bus with his officers. They dragged Isaac Woodard off that bus while he was still in his uniform, still wearing that discharge pin that proved he'd served his country. Woodard asked what he'd done wrong. He asked to see a warrant. He called them "Sir." None of it mattered. Shull and his officers beat Woodard viciously with their nightsticks, pummeling him until he collapsed. But that wasn't enough. In an act of calculated, methodical cruelty that haunts American history, Police Chief Shull took the end of his baton and jammed it directly into Isaac Woodard's eyes. Not once, but repeatedly, grinding the wood into his eye sockets until both corneas ruptured and hemorrhaged. Woodard screamed in agony as his vision dissolved into darkness. Then they threw him into a jail cell and left him there overnight. No doctor, no medical attention, no explanation, no charges, no humanity whatsoever. By the time morning came, Isaac Woodard was permanently, irreversibly blind. He would never see another sunrise, never see his wife's face, never read another book, never witness the world he'd fought to protect. The police released him without a word, leaving him to stumble blindly through an unfamiliar town until a black family found him and helped him to a hospital. The local authorities assumed the story would die there, just another nameless atrocity in the long, bloody catalog of Jim Crow violence. Just another black man who stepped out of line and paid the price. But something different happened this time. The NAACP got word of the attack. Black newspapers began publishing the story. And then, in a twist no one could have predicted, the story reached the desk of Orson Welles. Yes, that Orson Welles, the legendary director of Citizen Kane, one of the most famous voices in America. Welles read about what happened to Isaac Woodard and was absolutely horrified. He couldn't let it go. For 4 consecutive nights on his national radio program, which reached millions of Americans, Welles dedicated his entire broadcast to Isaac Woodard's case. He described the brutality in unflinching detail. He named Police Chief Linwood Shull on air, over and over, making sure the whole country knew exactly who had blinded a decorated veteran. He demanded justice. He demanded accountability. And America listened. The outcry became a firestorm. Newspapers across the country picked up the story. Civil rights organizations mobilized, pressure mounted. And crucially, the story landed on the desk of President Harry S. Truman himself. Truman, a man from Missouri with complicated views on race, read the details of what happened to Isaac Woodard and was shaken to his core. In a private letter, he wrote, "My very stomach turned over when I learned that Negro soldiers, just back from overseas, were being dumped out of army trucks in Mississippi and beaten." For Truman, this wasn't abstract anymore. This was a man who'd served his country and been rewarded with blindness. The federal government did something almost unprecedented. They intervened in a Southern racial violence case. The Justice Department indicted Police Chief Linwood Shull and brought him to trial. For a brief moment, it seemed like justice might actually be possible, that the system might actually work for a black man, even in the Jim Crow South November 1946. The trial begins in a federal courthouse in South Carolina. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. There are Isaac Woodard's destroyed eyes, examined by doctors who testified about the deliberate, brutal nature of the injuries. There are witnesses who saw the attack. There are medical records. The case against Shull is airtight. This should be the easiest conviction in American legal history. But this is South Carolina. This is Jim Crow, and the jury is all white. They deliberate for exactly 30 minutes. 30 minutes to decide whether a police chief who blinded a decorated veteran in his custody committed any crime at all. When they return to the courtroom, the verdict is read, "Not guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupts in applause. White spectators cheer and clap as if their local football team just won a championship. Linwood Shull walks out of that courtroom a free man, smiling and shaking hands with his supporters. Isaac Woodard, sitting in the gallery, blind and broken, listening to the celebration of his attacker's freedom, must have felt like the very concept of justice had died. The system had won again. White supremacy had protected its own. The message was clear. You can blind a black veteran with impunity. You can destroy a man's life for asking to use a bathroom, and white America will applaud you for it. It seemed like the final crushing defeat. Another chapter in the endless story of racial violence without consequence. Another black man sacrificed on the altar of Jim Crow, with nothing to show for it but pain and darkness. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. Here's what they erased from the textbooks. Isaac Woodard's blinding didn't end in that courtroom. It didn't end with Shull's acquittal and the system's victory, because President Truman couldn't forget. He couldn't unsee what had been done. The image of Isaac Woodard, blind and betrayed by the country he served, haunted him. In December 1946, just weeks after Shull's acquittal, Truman did something remarkable. He created the President's Committee on Civil Rights, the first federal commission specifically tasked with investigating racial injustice. The committee's formation was a direct response to Isaac Woodard's case. And then, on July 26, 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981. With the stroke of a pen, he desegregated the entire United States military. Every branch, every base, every unit. Black and white soldiers would train together, fight together, sleep in the same barracks, and eat in the same mess halls. It was the first major federal action against segregation in American history. This happened 6 full years before Brown versus Board of Education desegregated schools. 6 years before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. The military, America's most powerful institution, became integrated because of what happened to one Marine on a bus in South Carolina. Think about the magnitude of that for a moment. Military desegregation became the blueprint for the entire civil rights movement. It proved that integration could work. It proved that black and white Americans could serve side by side with excellence and honor. Every integrated military unit, every black officer who rose through the ranks, every general and admiral and pilot who came after, they all stood on the shoulders of Isaac Woodard's sacrifice. His blindness bought freedom and dignity for millions of black service members who would come after him. The cruel irony is almost unbearable. Linwood Shull walked free. He was never punished. He lived the rest of his life as a free man in South Carolina, probably celebrated by his community for putting that uppity black soldier in his place. In the immediate sense, he won. But in the larger arc of history, he lost everything, because his act of brutality, meant to terrorize and silence, instead sparked a change so profound that it reshaped American society. One act of violence against one black Marine set in motion the integration of the most powerful military in human history. Isaac Woodard lived until 1992. He spent nearly 50 years in darkness, his sight stolen by hatred. He never saw the integrated military he helped create. He never witnessed black generals commanding troops or black pilots soaring through the skies. He never saw Colin Powell become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But he knew. People told him. They made sure he understood that his suffering wasn't meaningless, that his refusal to stay silent, despite his blindness, despite the acquittal, despite everything, it mattered. He testified at hearings. He shared his story again and again, even when it was painful, even when the world tried to forget him. And that's the lesson they don't want you to learn. That's why Isaac Woodard's name isn't in every history textbook in America, because his story proves something dangerous to the status quo. It proves that systemic oppression can be shattered by individual courage. It proves that one person's truth, spoken loudly enough, can force an entire nation to change. It proves that even when justice is denied in a courtroom, history keeps a longer record. Isaac Woodard lost his eyes but gained immortality. Linwood Shull kept his freedom but became a symbol of everything America needed to overcome. They tried to erase Isaac Woodard. They tried to blind him into silence. They tried to make him just another forgotten victim of racial terror. But truth has a power that transcends sight. His story survived. It echoed through the halls of the White House. It changed laws and policies. It opened doors that had been bolted shut. Every Black American who has served in an integrated military, everyone who has commanded troops or flown fighter jets or led soldiers into battle without fear of the uniform they wear, they are living proof that Isaac Woodard won. They blinded one Marine, but they couldn't blind history, and they couldn't blind the future that Marine helped create. That's the power of remembering. That's the power of truth. That's the power of one man who refused to be erased, even in darkness. Isaac Woodard couldn't see the world he changed. But because of him, millions of Black Americans could finally see a future, in uniform, without fear, with dignity, with equality. That's not just history. That's victory.